Good morning, YouTube. Today I'm starting a new reading. I've always wondered about the fold of Leibniz and the Baroque, or the fold particularly, because I thought it was an answer for something as well, but I can't remember what the question was. So this is what we're reading. Deleuze's The Fold, Leibniz and the Baroque, fold in translation by Tom Connolly. I have read over the contents page. As you might see, it's all down here. I've put it in my notes so I can have it all neat. And that's it. You can have it look like that, and that's all you're getting, because we're not going to read over it again because I've already begun the translator's forward, but only 2 paragraphs. I thought, why am I not recording? I shall do that. This bit. I'm doing this for your benefit, so be grateful. There we go. You can stop it there and read it if you like, and this bit, and this here, and here, and okay, where are we? Soon after finishing what would bear the title of The Art of the West, an aesthetic history of the High Middle Ages, Henry Faucillon theorised the experience of his research in By des Formes. Reflecting on the emergence of the Romanesque and Gothic styles, Faucillon confronts dilemmas facing all historians of the Middle Ages and the ancient regime. How do styles develop, and why do they differ so markedly? Do they succeed one another or share pertinent traits? Do aesthetic styles convey, in a broader sense, the notion of particular manners of thinking? Can styles be periodized, and if so, what are the ideological motivations betraying the historical schemes that also tend to produce them? In the context of French literary and aesthetic history in the aftermath of the First World War, Faucillon departs from traditions of aesthetic and literary botany that date to Sainte Beuve and Auguste Comte. For them, tables, categories, genealogical trees, and lines of filler could map out great mnemonic systems. They would soon program the ways the French nation would construct its patrimony. Students of these paradigms would forever recall grids, fill them with appropriate facts and traits, and thus be informed by schemes of knowledge. To the contrary, Faucillon notes that the Romanesque and Gothic, 2 dominant and contrastive styles, often inflect each other. They crisscross and sometimes fold vastly different sensibilities into each other. The historian is obliged to investigate how the 2 worlds work through each other at different speeds, and in turn how they chart various trajectories on the surface of the European continent. In By des Formes, Faucillon rethought the logic of evolution that had been bequeathed to the 20th century. On the one hand, a remarkably firm tradition of inquiry, observation, and historicisation came with positivism, yet on the other, the really creative positivists of the 19th century, Balzac, Hugo, and Proust, built works whose mass, fragmentary totality, and changing effects dispute the truth, validity, or honesty of a statement. Impugn statement or money, call into question. Impugnable. Late Middle English, also from the sense assault, attack physically, from Latin impugnare, assail, from in, towards, plus pugnare, fight, impugni. Is it? What's this? Impugn. Is it, isn't it? Impugn. All right, so where are we at? Yet, on the other hand, the really creative positivists of the 19th century, Balzac, Hugo, and Proust, built works whose mass, fragmentary totality, and changing effects impugned the tabled symmetries that their scientific counterparts had invented. The history of the Romanesque and Gothic appeared, in the eyes of Fauchelevent, no less massive in its overall effects than the poems and novels of the 19th century literary masters. At certain points, Fauchelevent's overview of the Middle Ages resembles a mix of technical history and organic chemistry. Forms move back and forth, disappear, recur, or bring out new shapes when they are superimposed or interconnected. Gothic maidens at Reims indeed smile, where Romanesque peasants at Vézelay had been staring exorbitantly and aghast at the onslaught of the Second Coming. Both styles experience a Baroque phase. Romanesque buildings and sculptures on tympana and capitals. Tympanum, a tympanic membrane or eardrum. Tympana plural. A membrane covering the hearing organ on the leg or body of some insects, sometimes adapted, as in cicadas, for producing sound. Architecture. A vertical recessed triangular space forming the center of a pediment, typically decorated, a recessed triangular space over a door between the lintel and the arc drum. 17th century, from Latin, via Latin from Greek, tympanon, drum based on tuptien, to strike. These capital, that's got something to do with architecture, I suppose. Capitals. And the distinct, typically broader section at the head of a pillar or column. Little head. Okay. Romanesque buildings and sculptures on tympana and capitals with their solemn aura share features that can be identified best by categories whose descriptives belong to a later period. Footnote 3. Included are profusions of moving shapes, the loss of function, search for picturesque effect, the mixture of architecture and a proclivity for anecdote. Sculpture of the 12th century, he notes, desiccates through an excess of confidence in formulas, through a necessary consequence of serial production and industrial fabrication. Stress added. For Fauchelevent, what would be mistaken as improvements is, on the contrary, a sign of living form. Where would that? What number? 3. There it is. In a similar vein, the textured effects of irreality in the flamboyant in the 15th century tend to narrate the entire history of the adventure of the ogive. What's an ogive? Architecture. A pointed or Gothic arch, one of the diagonal groins or ribs of a bolt, a thing having at the profile of an ogive, especially the head of a projectile or the nose cone of a rocket. a cumulative frequency graph, a pointed or Gothic arc. I don't know. Ogive. And flow into the life of culture in general. I'll just read that again. In a similar vein, the textured effects of irreality in the flamboyant. What's a flamboyant? In the 19th century, tend to narrate. Nothing found. Oh, flamboyant. All right, it's flamboyant. Very good. Flamboyant. Flamboyant of a person, architecture of or denoting a style of French Gothic architecture marked by wavy flame-like lacery and ornate decoration, compared with rayonnette, flaming, blazing, flame. Relating to or denoting a French style of Gothic architecture prevalent from circa 1230 to circa 1350, characterised by distinctive rose windows, French literary radiating from the pattern of radiating lights in the window. Right, and the other one is contrasted, right? Flamboyant, and it's marked by wavy, flame-like lace, tracery, and ornate decoration. Okay. In a similar vein, the textured effects of irreality in the flamboyant in the 15th century tend to narrate the entire history of the adventure of the ogive, the Gothic arch, and the flow into the life of culture in general. The irreality flows into reality. Unreality, irreality, French. Through the theory gained from his observations in Vie des Formes, Vaucelin calls into question the rationale of periodization. With figures borrowed from biology, he bends many of the schematic lines of positivistic forebears. At the same time, adapting Wilhelm Wöhringer's notion of the Gothic as what signifies a will for movement running through the entire Middle Ages, Vaucelin assails the gap that exists in the Entre deux scurrilis. I just get that translated. Between French and German culture. May refer to French for the interwar period between World War I and World War II, a chronological grouping of a collection of short stories from Manhattan monologues. Okay, so it's a period of time in the interwar years. What do we got? At the same time, adapting Wilhelm Wöhringer's notion of the Gothic as what signifies a will for movement running through the entire Middle Ages, Vaucelin assails the gap that existed in the interwar years between French and German culture. Okay. He writes of a history of art composed of differently paced but intermingling phases. An experimental beginning seeks solutions to problems that a classical moment discovers and exploits. A radiating rayonnette period refines the solutions of the former to a degree of preciosity, while a Baroque phase at once sums up, turns upon, contorts, and narrates the formulas of all the others. Okay. Preciosity, excessive refinement in art, music, or language. Late Middle English, in the senses preciousness and a valuable thing, from Old French, preciosité, from precious. The sense of excessive refinement dates from the mid-19th century and is derived from Molieris les precieuses, ridiculous, a comedy in which the ladies frequenting the literary salons of Paris were satirized. Preciosity. Okay. A radiating rayonant period refines the solutions of the former to a degree of preciosity, while a Baroque phase at once sums up and turns upon, contorts and orates the formulas of all the others. The Baroque thus does not compromise what we associate with Bernini, or Romini, or Lebrun. The Baroque state reveals identical traits existing in constants within and most diverse environments and periods of time. Baroque was not reserved exclusively for the Europe of the last 3 centuries, any more than classicism was the unique privilege of Mediterranean culture. Footnote 4. I think I can do that. The life of forms in art, 15. Baroque designates a trope that comes from the renewed origins of art and has stylistic evidence that prevails in culture in general. Under its rubric, are placed a proliferation of mystical experience, the birth of the novel, intense taste for life that grows and pullulates, and a fragility of infinitely varied patterns of movement. Pullulates. Multiply and spread prolifically or rapidly. Pullulate with. Be full of or teeming with. Later, it's sprouted from the verb pullulare, from pullulus, diminutive, pullus, young animal. Pullulate, where's your synonyms? Is that like proliferate? It does say proliferate, prolifically. Okay, so what do we got? Under its rubric, the Baroque, are placed the proliferation of mystical experience, the birth of the novel, intense taste for life, and the life that grows and pullulates, and a fragility of infinitely varied patterns of movement. It could be located in the protracted fascination we experience in watching waves heave, tumble, and atomize when they crack along an unfolding line being traced along the expanse of a shoreline. In following the curls and wisps of colour that move on the surface and in the infinite depths of a tile of marble, or as Proust described, when we follow the ramifying and dilating branches of leaves piled in the concavity of the amber depths of a cup of tea. Good golly. Gilles Deleuze appears to share these same sensations in his dazzling reading of Leibniz. The Fold tells indirectly of the reincarnation of the Franco-German philosopher through the Baroque, as understood by Fossilon in its broadest and most influential way, that radiates through different histories, cultures, and worlds of knowledge. Deleuze's work may be the first and most daring venture to take the Baroque in the specific figure of the Fold through the history of art, science, costume, mathematics, lyric, and philosophy. The Fold might also stand as one of the most personal, sensuous, and original of all Deleuze's writings. At the same time, its breadth might also strike readers as difficult and opaque. At first glance, the book is disarming. The implied reader is taken to be as familiar as the author is with atomic theory, differential calculus, classical and contemporary painting and music, and with the history of logic. I just take a note so I can become that is expert in those fields to understand this book, maybe. Paste. All right. The implied. Yet the pleasure Deleuze affords comes with the confidence he invests in the reader. The work is composed as if spoken to a friend relaxing on a sofa by a window of a small apartment on a second or third floor that overlooks a large city. Without pretension, Deleuze speaks of marvellously difficult equations in differential calculus, biological and fractal models of the performance of the music of Boulez, of an aesthetic history. The book's tone flatters us at the same time it dismantles with posture or grandiloquence, pompous or extravagant language, style or manner, especially that intended to impress. Late 16th century from Middle French, from late Latin, grandiloquentes, quentia, from Latin, grandiloquus, say grandiloquent, grandiloquentus. The book's tone flatters us at the same time it dismantles, without posture or grandiloquence, some of the most shock-worn beliefs we have inherited about the texture of our physical world. At the same time it dismantles but our beliefs, what we inherited about the texture of the physical world. In what remains of this preface, I should like to touch on what Deleuze appears to be doing with Leibniz and how his affiliation with the philosopher affects what we discern about contemporary issues. I'll just take that. That's like the, what do you think? Conjecture. That's what I find. Christ, right, flickered. Come on. Places. Deleuze argues that while the Baroque has been a disputed term in the fine arts, aesthetic history and music, it has not been associated with either a philosophy or a philosopher apt or complex enough to embody and theorize its principles. For Deleuze, Leibniz happens to be the philosopher of the Baroque. Leibniz is so contemporary that the ensemble of his research on science and mathematics, or his treatments of contradiction, belief, music, and theology, help to explain or unfold what we know about the world at the end of the 20th century. The experience of the Baroque entails that of the fold. Leibniz is the first great philosopher and mathematician of the plate of curves and twisting surfaces. He rethinks the phenomenon of point of view, of perspective, of conic sections, and of city planning. Included in the category of things folded are draperies, tresses, tessellated fabrics, ornate costumes, dermal surfaces of the body that unfold in the embryo and crease themselves at death, domestic architecture that bends upper and lower levels together while floating in the cosmos, novels that invaginate their narratives or develop infinite possibilities of serial form. Oh, that's an exclamation point. Ah. I'll look up what a full stop means here. Ah, there's my dictionary. In Invaginate. Fold. Okay. Be turned inside out or folded back on itself to form a cavity or pouch. Back formation from invagination. Invagination. Invagination is the process of a surface folding in on itself to form a cavity, pouch, or tube. In developmental biology, invagination of epithelial sheets occurs in many contexts during embryonic development. Invagination is critical for making the primitive gut during gastrulation in many organisms, forming the neural tube in invertebrates, and in the morphogenesis of countless organs and sensory structures. Models of invagination that have been most thoroughly studied include the ventral furrow in Drosophila and melanogaster neural tube formation and gastrulation in many marine organisms. Do you know about this, Roffy? Are you reading this as well? You didn't give it to us. I'm not wondering whether you have read. Maybe you have. Probably have. Novels that invaginate there. All right, what's going on here? Included in the category of things folded are draperies, tresses, tressallated fabrics, ornate costumes, dermal surfaces of the body that unfold in the embryo and crease themselves at death, domestic architecture that bends upper and lower levels together while floating in the cosmos, novels that invaginate their narratives or develop infinite possibilities of serial form, harmonics that orchestrate vastly different rhythms and tempos, philosophies that resolve Cartesian distinctions of mind and body through physical means, without recourse to occasionalism or parallelism. Occasionalism. Frequently made or adapted for use on a particular occasion or for infrequent use, literary composition, speech, religious service, etc., produced on or intended for a special occasion, dated, employed for a particular occasion or on an irregular basis. Occasionality. There's a study of occasional stuff. Isn't that fascinating? Without recourse, philosophies that resolve Cartesian distinctions of mind and body through physical means, without recourse to occasionalism or parallelism, grasped as foldings, styles and iconographies of painting that hide shapely figures in ruffles and billows of fabric, or that lead the eye to confuse different orders of space and surface. Physical means. Grasp styles and icon painted hiding shop. Who rethinks phenomenon as a point of view and perspective, including all that. And who's this? Deleuze or Leibniz. Now in The Art of the West, Fossalon remarks that the age of the Baroque, Gothic, witnessed at the birth of mystical experience. Now in The Art of the West, Fossalon remarks that the age of the Baroque Gothic witnessed the birth of the mystical experience. It is characterized, as other thinkers have since shown in greater detail, by an individual's account of his or her voyage to and from an ineffably universal event, which set the body into a trance, and which has left marks, scars, or other physical evidence that confirm the individual's tale of passage. 5. Michel de Certeau, Mystique in Encyclopedia Universalis, Volume 12, English translation, forthcoming by critics. Okay, the mystical venture convinces because no language can be said to represent what it means. It is tantamount in part to what Deleuze, by means of Leibniz, Henry Michaux, and Chateau Clairamblant might call an event. Okay. An event that leaves a scar. An effect. It may not have an empirical or historical basis, but it happens to be the virtual sensation of a somatic moment of totalization and dispersion. Event. Now in The Art of the West, Bolson remarks that at the age of the Baroque Gothic witnessed the birth of a mystical experience. The Baroque Gothic witnessed the birth of a mystical. All right, just take the whole lot. Just like that. Copy it. And I'll make it blue. Paste. What have I done? Nothing. Oh, that's in there. Piss off. There we go. Now in The Art of the West, Fossilon. I'm trying not to do that. Fossilon. Fossilon remarks that the age of the Baroque Gothic witnessed the birth of the mystical experience. This mystical experience is characterized, as other thinkers have shown in greater detail, by an individual's account of his or her voyage to and from an ineffably universal event, which set the body in a trance. And in a trance, body in a trance, and comma, and which has left skid marks, not skid marks, stretch marks came to mind when I read that. Marks, scars, and other physical, not scars, and other physical evidence that confirm the individual's tale of passage. From note 1, right? From note 5. The mystical venture convinces because no language can be said to represent what it means. It is tantamount in part to what Deleuze, by means of Leibniz, Henry Michaux, and Gautier, what's this? No. Let me do it. Listen. There we go. Getire. Claire. Claire. Ambulate. One word is cut off in the might call an event. Where is that? Event. It's been italics. Let's put some clothes on. It will warm me. What else? The out of the west, I should do that as well. It's a book. Oh, look, it's comma there. And that and that. And the out of the west. That. And I know the time is back. It's really broken. It may not have an empirical or historical basis. This event may not have an empirical or historical basis, but the event happens to be the virtual sensation of a somatic moment of totalization and dispersion. Somatic, that's like the skin, isn't it? Relating to the body, skin of the body, especially as distinct from the mind. Okay. Relating to the soma. Isn't the soma like the skin of soul? Soma, body. Okay. I'm just going to go in there for a second and have a little bit further. Somatic, soma. Part of the organism other than the reproductive cells, the body as distinct from the soul, mind, or psyche. There we go. The body is distinct from the soul, the mind, or the body. Psyche. The body. Excuse me. There we go. And the event may not have an empirical or historical basis, but the event happens to be the virtual sensation of a body moment of totalization and dispersion. In a novel or poetry, it can be felt, the event can be felt as a seriality of epiphany. Its scientific analogies might include the thoughts of infinity that come with the view of the world in which all of its visible objects are moving aggregates of infinite numbers of atoms and molecules. I might keep that as well. In the vision of Alfred North Whitehead, a philosopher inspired by Leibniz, an event can be seen in the duration that produces the sight of a pyramid, an avalanche of snow, or the jagged edge of rifts in a block of ice. For Deleuze, an event unfolds from the union of our perception and the duration of a fan, of a kind Mallarmé describes in his occasional verse, that unites and disperses a word, an event, and an object, an eventail, when it swirls the atmosphere. Holy macaroni. We're talking about art here? I just have to take that so I can concentrate on it for some time and see what that's saying. An event is. Is it like an encounter with the, what is that called? Sublime. Is it like that? An encounter with something large. That you have a total aspect because you're bodily grasping it somehow. I don't know. Is it when you're caught in an event and it scars you? The event that scarred you for life. Could be neat. I just have to make sure I've got that right. In the novel or poetry, it can be felt as a seriality of epiphany. So when you get a serial, like a lot of epiphanies, and epiphany is like a grasping of something, isn't it? Like an idea. Epiphany, a manifestation of Christ. Okay. The Gentiles, as represented by the Magi, Matthew, the Christian festival commemorating the Epiphany on the 6th of January. Manifestation of the divine or supernatural being. A moment of sudden or great revelation or realization. That's the one. It's not epitome. Similar though, isn't it? I said that wrong once. I said epitome instead of epiphany or epiphany instead of epitome in a tutorial, no less. I was corrected though, that was okay. You mean epitome or epiphany? Yeah, that one. Seriality. So that would have been a serial. Repeatedly committing the same offence, repeatedly following the same behaviour. Using transformation as of a fixed series of notes of a device involving the transfer of data as a single sequence of bits or a process running a singular task as opposed to multitasking. Where is it? Seriality of epiphany. We get reveal in a serial manner. In the novel or poetry, it can be felt in the seriality of the epiphany. Its scientific analogies might include the thoughts about infinity that come with the view of the world in which all of its objects, visible objects, are moving aggregates in infinite numbers of atoms and molecules. It is something about totality, isn't it? It's got to. In the vision of Alfred North Whitehead, a philosopher inspired by Leibniz, an event can be seen in the duration that produces the site of the pyramid, an avalanche to Bergson's duration. In the duration that produces the site of a pyramid, and the duration that produces an avalanche of snow or the jagged edge of rifts in a block of ice. The time during which something continues. Okay, so it's something about time then, isn't it? About in the serial that's got temporal aspects about it. It's more than one. Down here. For Deleuze, an event unfolds, okay, so it unfolds from the union of our perception and the duration of a fan. What do you mean, a fan? Like a fan of a pop star? Of a kind, Mallarmé? Mallarmé describes in his occasional bursts. I don't know. Never read anything of Mallarmé that I'm aware of. Malama. My. Describes an as a cardinal verse that unites and disperses a word and event. Does a word unites and disperses? So like the epiphany, it unites a word with someone's realisation of the word and spreads it out again. And an object that will an inventail. What's an inventail? Leftovers, the scar bit. Inventail. Tile. When it swirls the atmosphere. Good golly. What, I closed you? Eventile. Fan. Masculine noun. Range. Siri. A range of possibilities. Price, salary. It's informal. To lays about. What's fan? Now, an enthusiastic, general fan. Supporter. Star. Fan. Cooling fan. Motor vehicle fan. Farming. Fan. Admirer. Turer. Okay, that might be a fan. A fan that unites and disperses a word. Well, I don't know. I don't see you continue. Righty. I almost forgot there's such a thing as a bot. I'll get there eventually, I suppose. These rarefied areas of sensation, rarefied, make like gaseousness of air pressure, especially at a high altitude of lower pressure than usual, thin, okay, distant from the lives and concerns of ordinary people, esoteric. Thin, these thin areas of sensation, these esoteric areas of sensation, make or become less dense or solid. It's thin of French rarefier, based on Latin rare, to make rare. These rarefied areas of sensation constitute a mystical and mathematical dimension of the Baroque. What else is that? Thinning, distant, esoteric. These esoteric areas of sensation, these less than ordinary areas of sensation, constitute a mystical and mathematical dimension of the Baroque. Okay. Is that like an out of ordinary consciousness that you might find in Schopenhauer? Leibniz declares Deleuze stands for the first philosopher able to deal with the experience of events and the world of atomic dynamics. Deleuze appears himself to be mystical insofar as much of the fold, especially in the arguments that develop from sufficient reason, incompossibility, perception, and the apportioning of space in chapters 4 through 8 develops through absolute identity with Leibniz. Okay. A reader often notices an indirect discourse that melds with the movement of the new essays on human understanding, or the correspondence with Arnauld Deleuze, whose voice translates better than any the experience of contemporary time, is harmonized with that of the Franco-German philosopher at the threshold of the Enlightenment. As we listen to Deleuze in the intimacy of the Baroque home in which the fold appears to be taking place, figure 1 in the first chapter, we perceive philosophical and ethical dilemmas on the horizon of our lives. Reincarnation of Leibniz follows a pattern of force. Deleuze has often identified with philosophers of the past, not always the most renowned, in order to confront political and ethical issues of the present. When he wrote on Nietzsche in the early 1960s, Deleuze was Nietzsche. He launched a transvaluation of a culture mired in existentialism that had not completely assimilated the effects of its colonial history. He then became Spinoza and Bergson at a time when intellectuals collectively cried for a return to Freud. To extend and modify the canon of philosophical writing, he wrote on Kafka, Melville, and later Francis Bacon. Yet Leibniz has always been a powerful force in all of Deleuze's writing. And at this stage of the philosopher's career, the fold comes as no surprise. The earlier writings, especially Logic du Sens, often mention Leibniz with admiration or use the monadology to recall the complexity of scientific theory in the ancient regime, but they never develop into identification with Leibniz's signature. A truism of French intellectual history states that for national and philosophical reasons, every post-war thinker, from Jean Hippolyte to Jacques Derrida, must contend with Hegel. Deleuze had resisted the totalizing effects of the dialectic by aligning himself at once with Cartesian and left-wing political traditions. He made moves that showed how, by way of Spinoza, a more complex, fragmented, and prismatic philosophy antedated, came before Hegel, and could not be supplanted by systematic dialectics. In this light, the study of Leibniz implies that an extraordinarily delicate filigree of concepts winding through organic and inorganic worlds has to be retrieved. Leibniz is thus also a philosopher of habitat and ecology. His myriad connections and series of concepts are not held in a prescribed order or a unifying system. Multiplicity and variety of inflections produce events or vibrations with an infinity of harmonics or submultiples. Movement of a concept that has bearing upon a subject's impressions of the physical world does not elevate according to a spiral plan, which belongs to philosophy, but radiates or ramifies it everywhere in a geography of experience, such that we can imagine movement of light and sound together as folds of ethereal matter that waft and weave. An exquisitely sensuous view of the world is obtained through the curved shapes that Leibniz creates with calculus, and from manifestations of folds that we follow in modern art and poetry. Deleuze implies that if a chronology of the history of philosophy is mapped over the kinds of vibrations and events developed from the Gothic period until now, something goes awry. How do you say that word? Leibniz is not merely a chapter in the history of mathematics, cognition, or logic. The relation of monadic thinking to our sense of the world cannot be discounted. The movement of his reasoning shares many common traits with what theorists of science, musicians, and artists are now calling making of habitat. Leibniz, he implies, develops a philosophy that bridges the pre-Socratics, Lucretius, and neo-Einsteinian thinkers. In light of earlier work, Proust et les signes, and his most recent writing, Qu'est la philosophie, with Felix, what is philosophy? Felix Guattari. The fold joins philosophy to the ecology of hypothetical experience. In his study of In Search of Lost Time, Deleuze noted that Proust's mission bore a Platonic label. The quest would restore art and lead to an enduring and redemptive idea. But what the text seeks to redeem is riddled from within by a stylistic practice that scatters everything that would comprise a whole or a unity. Yet, since the work is finished in its incompletion, there must be a unity which is the unity of that multiple piece, of that multiplicity, as in all of those fragments. 6. You need to study In Search of, that's Proust, yeah, In Search of Lost Time. What one's Deleuze's? 6 Deleuze, Proust, it's less science, that one. Deleuze's emphasis. Deleuze's stress on the partitive shows how Proust's great project of a total novel betrays a communication that would not be posited as a principle, but would result from the play of textual machines and their detached pieces of their unconnected parts. It is Leibniz who inspires this observation, since the 17th century philosopher first posed the problem of communication resulting from closed units or from what cannot be attached. By means of Leibniz's innovation, which marks the limits of communication, the subject is enveloped in the predicate, just as Proust's intention is folded into his effect. Inclusion of the subject in the predicate implies that the world makes up a chaotic cosmos or chaosmos. By way of Leibniz logic, Deleuze is able to conceive of artworks composed of units that are neither logical nor organic, that is, neither based upon pieces as a long unity or a fragmented totality, nor formed or prefigured by those units in the course of a logical development or of an organic evolution. As they're a fold instead. As in Fauchelon's vision of a life of forms that mixes biological and serial figures in its description of the Baroque phase, or in the giddy effects of partial things in the novel that betrays Proust's intentions, a hierarchy of organic and inorganic things no longer holds. Life is invested with brute matter insofar as it too is perpetually moving, metamorphizing, or emigrating from one condition to another. All of a sudden, by way of the relation of atomic theory to that of the monad, an ideology of hierarchies of life begins to totter. When organic and inorganic materials are differentiated not by a wall but by way of a vector, early in chapter 1, there ensues an ethical problem about how we are to apprehend the world, that humans stand as triumphant subjects among inert objects no longer holds. They no longer own things as they had in the world of possessive individualism. Now it must be asked how humans select and designate what they call living or inert. If organic life cannot be easily demarcated from inorganic matter, it behooves subjects to look at all matter from a different angle. Leibniz points towards an ethics that appends the science of ecology. In his turn, Deleuze suggests that an at once abstract and tactile sense of matter must figure at the crux of any social practice. An abstract and tactile sense of matter. Behooves. It behooves someone to do something. It is a duty or responsibility for someone to do something. It is appropriate or suitable. It fits. It behooves us to. In more recent work that follows the implications of the fold, Deleuze and Guattari promote conceptual activity that will move in the direction of a geophilosophy. Povinelli. Entailed is a revolution of absolute deterritorialization. 7. What is philosophy? The authors do mean that philosophy advocates the collapse of national boundaries or a return to diversities of economic or ethnic worlds, but that the totalitarian aspect of liberal democracy, spurred by the demise of the Soviet Union and the prospect of the European Economic Community, but that the totalitarian aspect of liberal democracy has to be atomized at least in one stage by the labour of conceptual thinking. They suggest that philosophy can acquire agency by the use of a monadic sensibility when it addresses issues of habitat and thinking. In QS, c'est quoi la philosophie? What is philosophy? A geopolitics of deterritorialization is advanced. The authors speculate that Greek philosophy is something that originates with migrants who arrive on the Aegean Peninsula and through their example initiate a collective sense of immanence. Ulysses, not Robinson Crusoe, is the ruseful plebeian. Useful. No, I did not mean that, and it's not going to help me. Ruthful, plebeian. Can I give me my right click? I'll go to the old Google. Not that way. This way. Good. Listening music. So we can study together with musical background. Ruseful. This is a typographical error that I'm searching for. Ruseful. The word you're likely looking for is rueful. No. No. Ruseful. We've got 84 followers on Instagram. How to author without writing. A Ruseful Guide for Lazy Geniuses by Brown E.J. Jiking. You go to the Ruseful Language for Lazy Geniuses. Useful. Useful.com, please. I'm going to ask the bot. A ruseful plebeian. Ruseful. Rustful. Rustful. I look at ruse and full of ruse. Ruse meaning. An action intended to deceive someone, a trick. Ruseful plebeian. Ulysses is the ruseful plebeian. Deceitful. That every man who inhabits urban space and who gives rise to a conceptual process in which are planted the seeds of its own demise might be. Alisa, that's a bot. That's a full stop, I think. Hi, is this mic to be roseful? What's a roseful plebeian? What's a roseful plebeian? Is a ruseful plebeian pie. How come I can't say it? Plebeian. Plebeian. What's it? Not useful. Useful. It's in the translator's preface. Preface to Deleuze says fold, or is it the fold? Fold. It looks like you're referring to a phrase from the that's what I just said. In that preface, Connolly uses the expression ruseful plebeian. What does that mean? It's not standard phrase in English, so it's deliberately idiosyncratic. It's doing two things at once. Ruseful meaning full of ruse, crafty, cunning, strategically clever, using indirect or playful strategies rather than straightforward force. Plebeian, so a member of the plebs, the common people. But here it's a crafty, resourceful commoner. Uses this to describe the discernment. Who operates outside elite academic or philosophical authority using ingenuity, detours, and improvised strategies. Only uses it to describe the position of the translator, situated not as a grand sovereign interpreter, gives rise to a conceptual process in which are planted the seeds of its own demise. Is the restful plebeian. urban space, and who gives rise to a conceptual process in which a plant of the seeds of its conceptual processes is demised. When it commodifies concepts, when the politics of deterritorialisation commodifies concepts, marketing seeks to co-opt philosophy. Deterritorialisation and its obverse reterritorialisation implicitly tying monadic thinking to the art of displacement and transformation. A stick is, in its turn, a deterritorialised branch. Those who conceive of organic and inorganic matter from this point of view tend to be geophilosophers. Their activity slides on the surface of the world. Unknown. I hang up, they'll call back saying, oh, there's someone there, well, let's call them back. And I'll not pick it up, someone saying, oh, do you want to buy a toothbrush? And I'll say, get fucked. Don't interrupt me, I'm trying to think. I've been interrupted. You with it? Those who conceive of organic and inorganic matter from this point of view tend to be geophilosophers. Their activity slides on the surface of the world as on a wave. A surfer, a geophilosopher, moves along this crest of turbulence on the shoulders of waves that envelop mind, energy, and matter, and then diffuse them into the atmosphere. That'd be an event. Elusive as the politics of geophilosophy may be, some of its clearest manifestations are found at the end of the fold. In the final chapter, Deleuze ties Leibniz's meaning of new harmony to Baroque and contemporary music. Footnote 8. A more complete explanation of Deleuze's theory of music is found in Ronald Bogg, Rhizomusicology, Substance 23, 1991, 89-101. The entire issue, cited by Charles Stibale, offers an excellent introduction and overview of Deleuze and Guattari's writings of the last decade. It also deals extensively with the Thousand Plateaus, a work that inspires much of their work on the Fold. So Thousand Plateaus written before the Fold. Yeah, it's 1983, isn't it? And this is 1993. Well, I didn't even know. I thought it Thousand Plateaus was more recent. Thought it was like the culmination. It did. It's the ovary. I'm getting cold. I'm going to have to go and put some clothes on and go to the toilet. I'll try not to. I have to ride. Where was I? Nah. There. How much more? I'm going to lose my place if I do that. There we go. That's where I am. No, there. Let's go for a bit of a run ahead. Lots of, oh, not that far. It's doable, isn't it? I could talk. He picks up, however, the strand of his discussion on the Baroque home that he had elaborated in the first and third chapters. By virtue of the radiation of musical waves that move in and about monads, the world is made up of a divergent series, and thus resembles an infinity of pleats and creases of unified and dispersed matter. All of a sudden, the distinctions that were used to elaborate Leibniz's vision of space in which the monad is composed of two floors, including first and upper, private, intimate area, including first and upper private intimate area, that would be a stage for a chamber ensemble, and second, a lower public level where masses circulate are no longer sustained. The sentence breaks off from the music of monadic harmony and decor, and they turn to issue. The sentences break off from the music of monadic harmony and decor. They turn to issues of habitat. The last question that Deleuze poses involves what it means to live in the world. Our experience of a shrinking globe inflects the vision of the monad, since compression of time and space modify the difference of inside and outside and of public and private. Thus, contemporary artists and musicians in the line of Leibniz transform modadology into nomadology. They are immigrant thinkers who deterritorialize accepted notions of space, like the shift of the opposition of organic and inorganic matter in tonal flow and flux, the movement from an order of ethereal and private space over a teeming public world or fishbowl, indicates how the geophilosophy will operate. The two worlds must fold into each other. The political implication is that the upper floor of the first world must refuse a distinction with second, third, and fourth worlds by a rethinking the difference of organic and inorganic forms, and by A, rethinking the difference of inorganic forms, and B, by reducing the speed of its movement to harmonise with that of the lower world. Leibniz has mediated what historians study in terms of social contradiction of the ancient regime with an activity that folds, unfolds, and refolds matter, space, and time. Contemporary artists, also geophilosophers and students of revolutions, are impelled to work in the same fashion. Their activity accounts for the shrinking of the world, its increased organic mass, and consequent impoverishment of biological variety. Forms like modes of folding disappear. The political strategy of the fold continually bends our dilemmas back onto Leibniz's fascination with infinite and curvilinear forms. Leibniz opens a window onto our world. Deleuze appears to use Leibniz's concept of harmonics to advocate the possibility of infinity to be thought within the restricted limits of our habitat. A process without spatial development is implied by the non-Hegelian tenor of the last clause in the book, plier, deplier, replier, fold, fold, fold. Thus, Deleuze argues for rediscovery of other styles, manners of folding the space of life. If philosophy can theorize the shrinking limits in which we live, Leibniz exemplifies a system that does not flatten nature to a concept or world picture. The searing irony is that Leibniz refuses simplification, so at the very time his work indicates how the technology of capitalism can be developed. David Harvey calls the idealization of nature and invention of the world picture in the aftermath of Descartes crucial for the beginning of compression of time and space in our time, the condition of postmodernity, 1989. It could be said that the deterritorialization effects of monadic philosophy are also apt to be co-opted. Deleuze notes that the Baroque has been linked with capitalism because it is associated with the crisis of property, a crisis that appears at once with the growth of new machines in the social field and the discovery of new living beings in the organism. By counterexample, the infinity of the folds locates where and how the world has since become compressed. Now, if the fold traverses all matter, its movement allows us to conceive ways of inhabiting the world with tactile resourcefulness. Its very abstraction for what indeed is the fold allows for elaboration of sensibilities, not under the yoke of liberal democracy. It may be that Deleuze's imagination of the fold harbours an impractical and unfounded optimism in respect to what can be conceived in our history of accelerated compression of time and space. The politics of the fold would seem to be so chimerical that Deleuze and Guattari could be linked to two spiritual automata, Quixote, and Sancho, who venture in an intimate infinity of philosophical space, far from the stress that human life and social contradiction impose on the globe. It is licit to wonder if the work withdraws into an interdisciplinary monad. Allowed, I suppose, it's not illicit. Not forbidden, lawful. Seen thus, the fold and what is philosophy would be hypothetical approaches to problems, population, habitat, displacement, geocide, that require urgent and practical commitment. Habitat, it must be counted, includes conceptual virtue. And since they beg reaction of this kind, these works can also be said to orient philosophy to the future of the planet in ways that pragmatic means have yet to conceptualize. In fact, the fold finds the clearest expression of its politics in the ways that a utopian thought, and by utopia can be meant Leibniz's fanciful lucid invention of the monad, joins the labours of philosophy. Leibniz is political because he is utopian. His theories of curvature, movement, the point of view cannot be localized. Deleuze and Guattari notes that a utopia is not separated from infinite movement. Utopia designates absolute deterritorialization, yet always at the critical point where the latter is attached to the relatively present milieu, and especially with forces that are the fabric of this milieu. 10. What is philosophy? The pleats and hems of the ideal Baroque home thus do not merely refer to a nowhere, as if prompting a mirror reading of Samuel Butler's Arion, but also to a now here that is present whenever, wherever, and wherever the concept of its space is taken up. In this sense, Leibniz's theories are not specifically objects, but in Deleuze's lexicon, Baroque territories. Baroque territories. What, in this sense, Leibniz's theories are not specifically objects, but in Deleuze's lexicon, Baroque territories. They pertain to a nature endowed with forces that Leibniz describes by tracking the motion of infinite folding, or by investigation of the caverns and crannies of porous shapes opened in the twists of stone, fossils, and metamorphic rocks. These are territories of contemplation for the mind, but they are not to be abused while it lives and thinks in a state of self-contained reflection. A similar politics emerges from Deleuze's comparison of Descartes and Leibniz's views on extension. For the former, the material world can be mapped out from the axis of the thinking subject in rectilinear fashion and can be divided into discrete units. The resulting geography resembles the order and process of the quincunx, a two-dimensional system of gridding and squaring that places a center, the ego, at the intersection of the diagonals of a surrounding square. When the self moves into space, it transforms one of the corners of the square or rectangle of its periphery into the site of a new center, around which new extremities are established, and so forth, until space is conquered. 11. As Samuel Y. Edgerton Jr. notes about the quincunx in designs of the body and the world in From Mental Matrix to Mappamundi to Christian Empire, the heritage of Ptolemaic cartography in the Renaissance, in David Woodward, Art and Cartography, 6 historical essays. For the latter, that was who? Leibniz, neither the self nor the world can work so schematically. Everywhere the subject swirls in the midst of forces that exert stress that defines the individual body, its elasticity and its bending motion in volumes that produce movement in and of extension. The subject lives and reenacts its own embryonic development as a play of folds, endo, meso, and ectoderm, rather than as battleground pitting the self against the world. By way of Leibniz's critique of Cartesian space, the author pleads for tact of body and environment. Like when you're tacking, skill, sensitivity in dealing with others or with difficult issues. Tactus, touch, sense of touch. Tangery, to touch. Pleads for tact of body and environment. The fold makes its sensibility manifest through its turn of style. These sentences are simple and the transparency of their expression often beguiling. Charming, enchanting, often in a deceptive way. They are built less from the verb or the tension of the subject and predicate than along the path of its logical seams on the edges or pleats of each sentence. Many start with what appear to be conversational modes with cest, cest bien, senest plus, siestque, siestquilla. These beginnings promise less than the philosophical charged incipit est gibt, or the French il y a, there is, what is the fact that, etc., that tend to identify the writer with a hidden authority invested with the power to judge and control those who read it or listen. Deleuze employs cest as a connector, as a unit that can link concepts into serial chains that attach to any number of other sentences. The construction stages the process, also dear to Leibniz, that conflates subject and predicate. Cast thus, Deleuze's sentences articulate the problem of inclusion and connection of different lexical constructions, vocables and phrastic units are apt to ramify. A word especially with reference to form rather than meaning. And phrastic units no. Phrastic, like a phrase. I don't know. Form rather than meaning, and as a phrase, units are apt to ramify on branches. The concept itself becomes a subject in conformity with each level of grammatical parts and wholes. Leibniz's logic makes a break, Deleuze argues in Sufficient Reason, chapter 4, with the classical conception of the subject as a rational being, by using terms linked by the copula to be and by bearing on cest. Deleuze does not shirk, avoid or neglect, be unwilling to do a person who strives. Does not neglect responsibility for elegance or for argument or stylistic clarity. Following Leibniz, he summons the distinction of subject and predicate that grounds Cartesian reason. The continuity of style in the fold keeps the one, either subject or predicate, from being an attribute of the other. At the same time, transparency is gained in apparent simplicity of the sentence. Different and simultaneous movements of logic and style develop within the syntax of each phrastic unit. In this sense, Foscellon's description of Baroque syntax in medieval art is not without parallel to the style of either Leibniz or Deleuze. Baroque forms, notes the art historian, live with passionate intensity a life that is entirely their own. They break apart even as they grow. They tend to invade space in every direction, to perforate it, to become as one with all its possibilities. The life of forms in art. Deleuze's style promotes confusion of form and sign, but paradoxically in ways such that the overall effect does not draw attention to itself. The sentence signifies its content, but the content is seriated to conform to the rhythm of the argument. Cut up. Arranged got into one or more series. Arranged. With some exception, Deleuze's sentences tend to be short, simple, and pellucid. Crystalline, transparent, clear, easy to understand. In their concatenation, these are interconnected things, linking things together in series, or the condition of being linked in such a way. They're linking, in their linkage, they break open and recombine, inviting the reader to isolate given clauses and reconnect them to produce mobile effects where verbal groups jump into or recur in other clauses. The implied movement mimes what the author finds in the play of fixity and passage in Leibniz' taste for simultaneous mobility and closure of concepts. Once again, the manner confirms what Deleuze observes about the sufficiency of Leibnizian reason, an extraordinary philosophical activity which consists of the creation of principles where there are two poles, one toward which all principles are folding themselves together, the other toward which they are all unfolding in the opposite way. The double movement betrays what Deleuze calls the extreme taste for principles, far from favouring division into compartments that presides over the passage of beings or things or of concept and of concepts under all kinds of mobile partitions. The geometrical shape of Deleuze's sentences reproduce the serialities of which he writes. Leibniz manifests a vision of the world with consequences that exceed the correlation of philosophy with the beginnings of industrial technology. At the beginning of the 18th century, the idea of a stamp or an impression promoting the effect of individual style imposed a law of constancy on the production of objects. With the fold, a fluctuation or deviation from a norm replaces the permanence of a law when the object assumes its place in a continuum of variation. The object requires a new status when it refers no longer to a spatial conception of moulding, but a temporal modulation or a continuous variation of matter. Chapter 2. The object is not withdrawn from the mould that forms it. A continuous temporal moulding of serialized objects replaces a paradigm of spatiality of another, of temporal order. So too is the tenor of Deleuze's style. Deleuze notices that Leibniz's mathematics of continuity and modulation change utterly our ideas about the object and event, but all the while they conform to an order of preformation. Deleuze's diction tends to replicate this standard for transformation. The sentences do not reflect the law, but vary in their implicit norm. They are declarative. They're often composed of 2 or 3 independent clauses connected by a colon or conjunctions. Unlike a classical concept, they do not seek to recall the origin of a signatory stamp. Attention is shunted away from their composition to the logical process that makes their linkage appear as an unfolding of ideas and shapes. Modulation, therefore, becomes a criterion of style. Consequently, the verbal material does not set forth to tell a narrative based on Aristotelian poetics, exposition, movement toward a plot point, and resolution that would tend to reach a kernel truth in the story of Leibniz and the Baroque. Nor does Deleuze, as might Jacques Derrida, construct an elaborate system of textual defense that produces a surface of tantalizing involutions, a shrinkage of an organ in old age and when inactive, e.g. of the uterus after childbirth. Mathematics, a function transformational operator that is equal to its inverse, that is, which gives the identity when applied to itself. The process of complicating something or a state of being complicated. Transformational operation that equals to the inverse, which is construct an elaborate system of textual defense that produces a surface of tantalizing signs or expressions of foreplay, which defer a gripping conclusion that inverts or twists the exposition. Instead, each chapter establishes a modulated flow, as it were, of concept sentence units, which flatten illusion that generally accompanies the rhetoric of argument or narrative. The chapters can be read in any order. Their conclusions are enveloped everywhere in the machinic manner of the text. The French edition is composed of long paragraphs that envelop the themes listed serially in the table of contents. Most of the material follows, but not always, the order he places under each chapter heading. The logic of the argumentation is carefully outlined. If the table of contents is not studied beforehand, the organisation of materials can appear dense and chaotic. To attenuate that impression, I have taken the liberty of inserting breaks in the text that roughly follow the themes listed in the summary. I have also divided many of the paragraphs into smaller units, whereas the specialist of philosophy may have no difficulty following the development of Deleuze's reasoning, readers of different backgrounds may find the added space helpful for pause and reflection. Otherwise, I have stayed as close as possible to the order and rhythm of the arguments. Wherever possible, I have quoted English translations of Leibniz from standard and available editions. The way that the German, French, and English editions of Leibniz are used in the fold is outlined in the preface to the notes. For the translation, I wish to thank Bjorn Iginla of the University of Minnesota Press, who encouraged its undertaking, Brian Masumi for his magnificent example of 1,000 Plateaus and timely advice about this project, and Clefstad and Mary Byers for their alert reading and emendations, John Aubrey of the Newberry Library, who solved many bibliographical riddles. Their assistance has been invaluable. The blemishes the reader will find are solely the fault of the translator. Emendations. Emendations. Just no, they're not. I'm going to try to love each other. Stop the press. Emendations. Zoology. Process of making a revision or correction to the text. And fold, part one, the fold. And I'm going to have to stop it and start it again later. Thank you for your kind attention.